In this video, we'll continue to walk through the process of configuring a digital lighting management relay panel and accessories. So the really cool thing about the LMCP is that it's really nothing more than a big room controller with up to 8, 24, or 48 relays, which means all the normal DLM devices that we have can all connect to this panel and control loads. Inside the panel's intelligence board, you'll notice that we actually have two different sets of jacks for you to be able to plug in your DLM devices. So let's get started by adding in the first device, a 3-button switch. So I've got a 3-button switch. I can connect it to any of the ports, whether on channel A or B. Let's just choose channel A. If you know, on a DLM switch, it typically takes you just a couple of seconds once you've set it up to be able to set up the relationship between the relays in the room controller and the buttons on the switch. There is one key difference, though, between this panel and a room controller. Out of the box, we're not going to bind any of the relays to the switch because that would be an awful lot of loads that we'd have to unbind if I only had, let's say, load 1, 2, and 3 that I wanted to control. So I'll tell you what, let's bind load 1 to this button, load 2 to this button, and loads 1 and 2 to the third button. In order to be able to bind the first button to any of the relays in the panel, we could use the configuration button either on the switch, or there is one right here in the panel. So if I press and hold that for about 3 seconds, after 3 seconds, it'll go into its normal P&L mode, which means load number 1 will turn on, all the others will go off. I can now actually just tap this switch, light its blue LED, press and hold for 3 seconds to get out, and I can now test out my switch to make sure it works. So in order to set up the next 2 loads, instead of doing it using push buttons at the panel, let's just use our load config option on the LMCP. So I'm going to choose that. It's going to tell me point at any IR port, and I'm just going to point at one of the switches. I've now gone into P&L, and now I've got load 1 on at the panel, and I can see that load 1 is being controlled by this button. Since I want this button to control loads 1 and 2, I'm going to tap that button, so now both of these buttons control load number 1. I'll go back to my LMCP, I'll say next. It says, all right, for load number 2, press select. Load number 2 goes on, and at this point now I want this button and the large third button to be able to control that. So I've now got my loads set up exactly how I want. I can say exit. It'll say pointed at the IR port, and I'm all done. So now to check these out, here's load 1, here's load 2, and here's loads 1 and 2. So these program just like any other DLM switch to other DLM room controller loads. So now let's say we want to set up our occupancy sensors, and we want both of these sensors to control the same load. So I've got them already connected together, and I'm just going to take their Cat5 cable and again plug into any open DLM port. It'll take about 30 seconds for the occupancy sensors to set up. So once the occupancy sensors are powered up, let's verify that they're not controlling any loads right now. I'm just going to double tap either the down button or the up button. You can see that no loads are turning on and off. But just like I said before, no loads in P&G automatically bind to any of the DLM sensors. So now let's say what we want to do is we want to bind load 13 to both of these occupancy sensors. Now I could do this using P&L by pressing and holding the button for about 3 seconds, and then load number 1 will turn on. And rather than sequence through all the loads, one of the little tricks is that you can actually jump in P&L to any load you want. It'll turn on, it'll turn off the other ones. I can then go to the occupancy sensor that I want to have control that load. You'll notice that its blue LED is off right now, so it's not controlling that load, but by just tapping the up button, the blue LED comes on, so that load is now being controlled by this occupancy sensor. Let's now exit P&L in the panel by pressing and holding for a couple of seconds. When it stops and goes to a different blink pattern, I know that the panel is set up so this relay is being controlled by this occupancy sensor. To set up this occupancy sensor to control that same relay number 13, I'm going to use the LMCP, and I'm going to say load config, and it shows up as load number 1. I'm then going to say next, and I'm going to jump all the way ahead to load number 13. So now when I hit select, it's going to jump over to load number 13 and show me the status. Since I'm on load number 13, I can actually use the handheld remote again, and there's an option here that's really helpful called bind, where what I can do is I can actually go to the sensor, I can say bind, it'll say point at the occupancy sensor you want to bind this load to. I point it at the other sensor that's in the room, its blue LED comes on, and then when I'm done, I can exit and just point to any IR port in the system. Now that we've got both of our occupancy set up to control load number 13, let's actually see that they control the load. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sensors and I'm going to go into test mode. It says all sensors on the bus. I'm going to point it at any sensor. And these sensors now should time out automatically if I stand very still. So there you have it. So what's important to remember about this is since we have multiple sensors both controlling the same relay, if either of them see motion, it will turn the load on. But both of them need to see no motion, be basically in a vacant mode, in order for that load to be able to go off. So the last thing that we want to do is just to show off the fact that, if you recall, this button's controlling load 1, this is controlling load 2, and this is controlling loads 1 and 2. Well, these buttons can actually control any group that we've got. Since I've already got a group that's set up inside the panel called number 3, I can say to that large button that I want group 3 to be controlled by this button. In order to do that, I'm going to have to use the LMCP, like so. Let's go down to More, Panel Setup, point to the panel, and there's an option now called button binding. So if all I do is press it, it's asking me identify the button I want to program. I press the button while I'm doing that, and now back in the LMCP it's showing me the button number and the type is load. But I can actually change that type now to group, and I can change it to group number 3 and send it back into the switch. So now this large button should control loads 5 and 6. And there we go. So there you have it, the LMCP panel. Now there's one other feature that isn't always obvious to folks, but we think we should be pointing that out to you. In this particular panel, we've got 24 relays, 24 loads. So what happens if on the job somebody adds another circuit or 2 of lighting? So if this was just another room controller, you'd add another room controller and just connect it on the Cat5. Well, remember that this is a DLM panel, which means that we can always come in and be able to add another room controller and just connect it on the Cat5 wire. So this now becomes 24 relays plus 2 more via this LMRC 102, giving me 26 loads. And that might just get you out of a jam. I hope you found this video useful. Please check out our other videos on DLM relay panels for complete information on configuring panels and accessories.